the squalor-riddled peasant in its natural habitat. Pitchfork gleaming in the sun before the unwashed masses are sent soaring to the dirt they belong in for daring to ask to be treated as human beings with dreams and families, and not just something to gather taxes from. This is Diplomacy is Not an Option, a brilliantly fun and delightfully challenging strategy game where you build a stronghold to counter the earthquakes caused by the heavy footfalls of aggressing hordes of peasants, royal armies, and even the undead, using an apocalyptic rain of boulders and impregnable squads of soldiers that stand against your thousands of foes. Thank you to Door407, the game's devs, for sponsoring me to check it out and to make this video. The second of the game's 31 missions begins with a choice to defend the king from a peasant revolt or to join in their rebellion. But since I'm masochistic enough to choose the penultimate pure insanity difficulty, largely based off of how it's split from the rest, and the game is upfront that facing the royal army is harder, it's time to be a bastard. The stingy king provides only a simple stronghold, a few amateur recruits, and some loyalist peasants that'll soon regret their choice, but whom begin gathering berries and making planks for the moment. The meager army is split up to banish the surrounding fog, but they quickly find that resentment runs deep in every last peasant here. They surround us, watching, planning, scouting us out for the huge army that will arrive in just days, and all of this after just finishing Baby's first tutorial. New houses convince more peasants in the surrounding wilds to defect every night, adding migrants and workers in the following day. The soldiers group up and pick off some of the more spread out rebels to allow for lumberjacks to have a semblance of safety. When vengeful peasants instead join the fray, swordsmen stop swinging and lead their foes in circles so archers can safely plink away. This small-scale unit control is known as micro, and on these higher difficulties, it is critical to avoid losses in the early game as you secure space around the city for things like stone mines and more homes. That same expansion unfortunately provokes small-scale attacks from all over, forcing soldiers back to defend the town instead of continuing their campaign. There is a huge balance to strike here between investing in a larger military able to better handle these and back into the economy. It feels like I've put a little too much focus into the stone used for slightly more advanced buildings, which means that after constructing a barracks, the lumber stores are too empty to put the huge number of new people to work. That extra stone does at least allow for some research that improves archer damage, though more will continue down the line to improve other soldiers, the economy, or utility buildings. With wrath in their hearts and newfound metaphorical fire in their quivers, archers conquer more of the land around them. Day 4 arrives sooner than anyone wanted, and the first rebel siege nears to test how ready we are. The army quickly focuses on securing space for peasants, where they build some basic wooden fortifications as the first war horns sound the enemy's approach. The cacophonic sound of hammers and frantic saws die down just in time to let peasants flee back inside the gate that slams shut behind them. Archers work to stain the fresh-hewn wood a wretched crimson, and the stench of blood soon joins that of sawdust in the air as rebels beat against their walls. Their bows are just barely strong enough to ensure that only a few pincushions to be stumble into the fort before the boot they railed against crushes them to never rise again. But peasants eager to celebrate don't get the chance to. Scouts announce the next wave of filth will arrive in just 2 days, and so archers return to taking back land from the rebels as the town hall undergoes renovations to unlock new tier 2 buildings. Unfortunately, the stockpiles are depleted yet again and can barely afford a simple iron mine. It's not that we're poor, we just have an efficiently utilized economy. Freshly gathered resources that were saved in case builders need to rush in more walls are fortunately able to be used when the next attack comes from the same direction as the first, which allows for reinvestment in lumberjacks and the expansive but productive farms that keep the town growing in hopes of outdoing the rising tide of blood around them. Beating drums once more herald their regress from thick fog and thicker trees. News of the first attack's failure heralds bloodthirsty rebels eager to avenge their fallen friends. Archers rain down arrows even as their arms grow weary, but swords made of beaten plowshares break the wall before the force is thinned. The swordsmen inside are insufficient to handle this swarm, but mana harvested from raised rebel buildings is instead harnessed to summon temporary black warriors. They're swarmed and cut down by rebels rightfully screaming about foul black magic, but their deaths buy just enough time for archers to once more finish tainting the taste of crops grown here evermore. As close as that was, upgrades are definitely going to be needed to handle both future waves and the catapults that nearby residents have that seem a little stronger than our bows. Thankfully, only more meager foot troops throw themselves at the walls while screaming about avenging lost friends and family. It would be great to just turtle inside and avoid the occasional death to the rebels, but the receding tree line naturally forces you further from safety and means that you have to keep expanding. It makes the gameplay between attacks just as tense as when they're threatening to destroy the town. A gravekeeper and cemetery tend to the dead, while the barracks is finally upgraded to hopefully put the former out of work. That unlocks crossbows, who are an upgrade to archers, spearmen and warriors better at melee combat than the basic swordsmen we have, and healers to keep everyone healthy. Since ranges felt so powerful, crossbowmen are recruited to help keep the base safe, while the experienced archers continue riding the knife's edge that is balancing expansion with their safety. Builders provoke rebels, while the town undergoes research that helps improve the economy. Wooden walls are improved and encased in stone that will hopefully ward off rebels, but neither that nor new crossbowmen are enough to keep the town safe from the ruthless peasants that launch their strongest attack yet. All hope seems lost until the town is saved by an upgraded magic obelisk that lets the mages harness the rest of their stockpiled mana to summon a ray of destruction that eviscerates the cretins until the few bolts and arrows loosed from on high are able to finish the job. Mana can be restocked, but the army feels more and more behind with every passing day. My economy faltered, and I'm not utilizing unemployed citizens well. Fixing that has to be the focus until the next attack, instead of really upgrading the military, if there is any hope to be had for fending off the even larger final attacks. The meager military's missions only barely manage to restock enough mana for one more beam before the drums of war once more strike fear into their hearts. Stone walls stall the massive hatred and indignity battering against them, but the lack of friendly catapults that can handle hordes mean that rebels only slowly die. A few spearmen, backed by healers, do stem the tide, but they're pushed to the brink and have to be saved with the last of the mana reserves, which just barely tip the tides away from complete annihilation. We need better, but it just can't be afforded. A market sends wood off in a rather charming zeppelin to secure some gold for future upgrades. Stone mines that are run dry by desperate peasants have to be rebuilt beyond the safety of the walls, though at least the growing number of spearmen and healers clearing out rebel camps make it much quicker and safer. Despite that, I'm still struggling to keep my citizens productive, and it feels like that's largely because I fell behind on securing land and consequently don't have the space to give them work or the resources to sustain a larger army. But that might be changing soon. The first glimmers of hope come in the form of an engineers guild, which helps even the field with the rebel weapons of war that currently can only be handled with some micro that bait shots and keep troops safe, which I'm frankly only including to brag about. StarCraft pros, don't hit me up, please. You'd straight dumpster me. An upgraded engineers guild could make even better siege weapons, but that requires a third tier of town center, which is far too expensive to afford this mission. The best we have, and perhaps ever will, is a huge tower that fits 4 catapults atop it to try and stem the tides of attacks threatening to beat the town into a bloody pulp. Though I am just now realizing that catapults have a minimum firing range, and so they can't guard the near walls from atop their shining beacon of stability in this town. Luckily, in quotes, there are enough enemies that they can fire away and do something all the same. The foes are numerous enough to ignore their suddenly airborne friends. A magical beam thins them, but unlike the last 2 times I did this, there are enough to pour past their disintegrated comrades and break down the walls so they can pour into the town. Spearmen and healers hold the line, while catapults pull back from the tower and help batter the funneling enemies around. That chaos keeps friendly soldiers alive, and while it is another close call, the 5th of 6 attacks is finally defeated in a manner slightly better than before. There's some hope for this final siege, which had seemed impossible. It'll be the hardest by far, and not just because all of the enemies left on the map will join the attack that arrives far too soon and from everywhere. The soldiers try, but ultimately fail to even clear out the otherwise unattacked southeastern front, and so are forced back to their posts along walls, ill-prepared for the consequences about to punish them. Magic does what it can, but there are too many undefended angles and too many reinforcements. The approaches that are watched are all criminally undermanned, and though catapults strike again and again, the tides never ebb. Enemies weather the rain of fire, breach into the town, pour past soldiers and desperate defenders. Citizens watch with stone in their guts, splinters raining down around them, and dreadful, sombering ash in their hearts. No amount of micro can save the day. In the end, the rebels burn and raze every last building as they let out huge rallying cries and prepare to march on the tyrannical king. Well, that was something. I feel like I made a good number of mistakes across the roughly hour-and-a-half mission, but I'd love to take what I learned there forward. Instead of repeating the mission though, I want to explore those endgame techs that I didn't have time for in marathon mode, one of the many challenges that the game has, and see just how crazily big opposing armies can get. Since the difficulty here only goes up to ultra hardcore, I'll try fighting the armored royals instead of poor peasants. And since micro seems really strong, and I love seeing the adaptions that no pause runs force in other games like RimWorld, I'm going to try that. That shouldn't be too hard. Why does that say attempt 1? Things are a little more hectic as time ticks away, while I'm left simultaneously trying to build and scout, though things start fairly similarly. The thick steel, emblazoned with the royal's crest, helps them shrug off arrows and delay progress, though they are still slow enough to be kited and killed. More lumberjacks work trees into logs and planks that I reinvest in houses to more quickly grow the population and unlock economical research early on to hopefully catapult the town towards catapults. Unfortunately, that focus means the barracks is only started as the tinged smoke of a signal fire in the northwest announces their imminent attack. Builders push into mostly cleared space to rush fortifications, again finished in the very nick of time. But the meager number of archers ready to defend them means that hard work soon reduced to scrap. Worse, the soldiers that broke the wall down were supposed to be but a diversionary force to allow another squad to sneak around the side and get into town. Ground soldiers rush off to try and gather their attention so that they'll come back and the archers might be able to handle them, but they're instead gutted where they stand. The enemies at the wall break in, and even magic can't handle these split forces. They trod over the corpses of soldiers and peasants alike as they quickly destroy the stronghold. So that is why it was attempt 1. I'm sure 2 will be much better. I overcorrected and focused on reinvesting in the economy a little too much. But while I can fix that, while managing buildings in this second run, I don't give enough attention to the troops that pull in too many enemies, and without room to kite, they're quickly surrounded by enemies tanky enough to survive their pea shooters and charge past them. Buildings die beneath their weapons, and there is no way to recover this. Without pausing, it's easy to make even slight mistakes that can end a run before 2 days have passed. Third time is the charm. The map's randomized each time I attempt it, and this rock formation looks promising, since it'll mean it's easier to wall the fortress off. There's even forests near accessible rocks to make little resource hubs that help fund early research, and a barracks a full day before it was ready on my first attempt, now that I'm no longer ignoring military development. Archers eager to serve prepare, and don't have to find out that this is the third try. We even research improvements to their damage before the first attack gets sniffed out. The royals realized and are seizing on the one avenue not protected by rocks, but plentiful wood stockpiles still gives the builders everything they need to throw down a huge wall while 24 archers prepare their quivers. The swordsmen, meanwhile, draw straws to choose who runs out and screams bloody vengeance against the king to make the soldiers charge them instead of the walls. It actually works and slightly delays their attack, though the swordsman is unhappy about it until they realize that no one died because of their efforts. Workers scramble in the muck to rebuild fortifications and upgrade the town hall, while soldiers continue the ever-present battle for more land. There's unfortunately no time to actually use the new buildings unlocked, when wood is instead spent on defenses so impressive that I guarantee not a single one will die. Because I kinda misjudged where the enemy would be coming from, and those walls aren't what's about to be attacked. Panicked soldiers charge over to try and defend the base, but without an obelisk to empower magic, the only recourse the mages have is summoning dark knights that don't do nearly enough to delay the royals. The fortress falls for a third time. It's fine, it's fine! I don't believe in charms! Never needed them. I needed to not be dropped on my head as a child. You know the early game drill at this point. Resource production, clearing out enemies, an even earlier barracks as I get better at managing resources, and defenses built between canyons a flood of archers stand behind, so they've licensed to fire away. This time, I play a little more aggressive, clearing camps till the first attack forces them back, and have more builders ready to secure the space as soon as the fight is over. Archers loose a barrage of arrows as soon as the royal banners peeking above the tree line are in range. But even with more bows than in previous attempts, the enemies break the walls down and start to flood past swordsmen and dark knights, unable to stem their tide. Magic is exhausted trying to prevent damage, but they still destroy a lumberjack's hut. The silver lining here is that the robust economy is equipped to bounce back and leap forward. Weary soldiers trek out into the wilds, while builders exhaust themselves rushing to upgrade the town hall and barracks. Once done, they double up the walls to better stall enemies, though all the resources spent on that and the time spent building and microing in the wilds means that the economy falters, to the point that 60 unemployed people wander about, wondering how much better this town could be if they were helping too. Despite that, the two thick walls hold the mass that descends on them better, though the gate itself is battered through in time. Dark Knights are able to be summoned and plug the holes well enough. It still isn't free though. A few royal soldiers push past and do kill civilians, but they're ultimately mopped up as the next day dawns. Though newly trained crossbowmen may be able to stop that from happening again in the future, citizens have to deal with the fallout, which includes mass famine, disease from the rotting corpses of their peers, and a litany of burials to attend to. I'm so overwhelmed trying to fix all of that and figure out how to utilize my workforce that, without pausing to be able to consider this freely, the army's left stuck inside the base instead of clearing royal camps, until half the break till the next attack flies by. The economy slowly crawls and lurches back to being healthy as more civilians gather resources used to secure ground. Excess food is made to counteract the famine and is then sold for gold for the future. Unfortunately, while I'd really wanted catapults for this next attack, there just isn't quite enough time for engineers to make them before the next forces are here. Crossbowmen are put to the new and impressive stone fortifications, but as nice as they and this growing town are, the next attack that comes knocking is a huge and terrifying mixture of brawn and siege. Magic tries to distract and to attack, but it barely does anything. Enemies are undeterred by the bolts raining down, and the sparse losses they do suffer only motivate the survivors to batter against the walls while letting out angry and soon-to-be triumphant battle cries as they pour into the town and slaughter everyone. That fourth try was better than the others by far, but it still stumbled all the same thanks to a few slight slip-ups. Early losses and poor resource management just caught up to me and killed me off. I'm definitely too inexperienced to beat this as is, though it does feel like it'd be possible if I were just better. For now, I'm going to try pausing to better manage the base, which means that I simultaneously build things and conquer the surrounding area. The barracks is up and running a half day earlier, archers are made as the first attack is announced, and the economy itself booms enough to easily start walling off the town with a little hard work. It's the strongest force I've ever fended, and while the attackers that meet them do eventually manage to burst in through the single thick wall, the swordsmen inside mop them up without even needing the aid of dark knights. Instead of starting to upgrade the town hall as the first battle is won, the renovation finishes and allow fountains that improve livability to bring more people. The population swells above 100 without a huge mass being left unemployed like before. The fact that there's only one meager iron mine does mean that there won't be that abundance of crossbowmen that require it, but basic archers are numerous enough to split up and clear the surrounding area in 2 parties with only a disturbingly high number of close calls. But, no one dies. Focus on that and how the town flourishes. The barracks is upgraded to start making healers and spearmen, while walls are thickened in anticipation of the attacks. An engineer's guild is even built, and though it won't quite finish catapults before the second attack, we didn't have the impressive weapons of war by the third siege last time. Farming begins to feed the booming population, and while all of this seems amazing, the royal camps to the north and their catapults do a lot to make sure that we aren't able to feel arrogant. The soldiers instead focus on the resources that can be secured from the more easily handled camps. An even line of tier 2 troops that isn't surrounded don't seem to be able to be hit by enough enemies that some healers can't keep them up, which immediately makes me wonder how relying on only ground troops would work out. Maybe not the best. Soldiers bravely charge in the opposite direction, away from catapults, to once more handle easier camps till the next attack forces them back to meager walls that'll be defended by the 5 catapults the engineers have managed to make. Enemies quickly charge forward and flood into tight groups before they are obliterated by hurled boulders. Their siege weapons are able to be targeted down and killed, and while the attack that destroys the most recent attempt does manage to break in this time, they kill but a single soldier without the growing mana reserve even needing to be tapped. That leaves the town with a seemingly luxurious 5 days until the next attack, which is spent using the market to acquire resources to continue upgrading the town hall, and using friendly catapults that thankfully do not do friendly fire damage to clear camps even faster. The soldiers finally reach the edge of the map, and civilians build a wall behind them to secure the space. The town itself weathers constant little attacks, but it isn't long before the town hall finally starts being upgraded to the 3rd tier on just day 17, when I didn't have it by day 24 during the first mission I showed. The optimizations and depth in this game just feel so good, and I can still tell that I haven't even begun to plumb the depths of what this game has yet. It's time to clear the dangerous northern lands. Towers housing catapults give them a bonus to their range so that they can defend troops that bait enemies in, though the royal siege weapons themselves are reluctant to advance into the line of fire. And my impatience gets the best of me. Half a dozen die for my sin, which is probably not the best way to celebrate the fully upgraded town hall. On the other hand, using magic to burn down their siege and retake the strongest camp yet is a little bit better, and there's still plenty of soldiers left to handle the imminent siege attack. More catapults are built constantly to help defend the walls, but there's a problem. After seeing how their last troops were blown about, the royal soldiers now have heavy armor that stops them from being knocked into the air and makes them tanky enough to weather the blows. There aren't very many foes, but neither rocks nor arrows nor even magic seem to do much damage. Double thick stone walls break before their seemingly relentless onslaught, and the reserves of magic have to be depleted just delaying them. Frontline soldiers and archers are thrown to their incessant, hungry maws to keep them from breaking in, and in the end, 20 die to whittle down and finally defeat the attack. We'd felt so close. While I could use more crossbows for their ability to focus single targets down, or have healers helping ground troops in front of the walls to buffer the damage, I can also just go for bigger siege weapons, because big explosions make me happy. The next tier of Engineers Guild can make a ballista with much higher damage than a catapult at the cost of having less splash, an expensive Trebuchet that has much higher damage and range than a catapult, and an explosive wagon I frankly just don't trust myself to use. Builders just barely finish a few towers for a ballista and for a trebuchet before the next attack arrives, so the latter can provoke some nearby encamped royals that just join and make the attack bigger. The other siege needs a little bit more time to set up, and so a lone horse archer trained at stables slips from the gates that batter shut behind them. They run circles, distracting the enemy far better than an unmounted swordsman could, and dipping and dodging about their blows to buy even more time. It's still not quite enough to upgrade the walls that enemies crash into. Their sturdiness lets them weather a magical beam and the rocks thrown from siege weapons. More are flung across the lake to try and kill them, but it isn't done until another few buildings and more than a dozen people die. At least the lone horse archer that did an amazing job of distracting them lived and is ready to be reported for a job well done. That's over half the attacks dealt with. The huge number of unemployed workers are made into builders so that they can shore up the issues by upgrading walls, though the military itself is always looking better. 3 ballistas one-shot enemy siege engines, massively improving how safely this land is reclaimed. And it's a good thing too, since mines continue running empty and the tree line never stops receding from lumberjacks eager to help the town out. Hopefully, a university, which unlocks endgame research, can help address those and other problems. A small attack in the south reveals a slight problem with the trebuchet's current arrangement. Their minimum range means that the large tower now doesn't quite cover the wall, necessitating more towers with overlapping circles of fire that are built all over the town, but are currently being focused in the northwest, where the next attack rears its ugly head. Heads. There are 2 markers worth of soldiers now, but I actually feel pretty strong as more and more weapons of war find their position. Given that the army sent royal spearmen once more, which are able to be scattered to the winds, I feel fairly justified in feeling that way. There are a lot of them, though the captain horse archer once more works to split their forces, but despite that, the mass weather the dozens siege engines firing upon them and reach the walls. I should be helping the horse archer escape, but I also am a YouTuber, which means I need to get good visuals, so you, loyal viewer, are indirectly responsible if this brave family man dies. Fortunately, the heavy fire raining down stops the enemies from getting enough swings to kill the wall, and the attack dies off without you even killing the now sergeant horse archer. And that's a good thing, because the sprawling neighborhood in the west leaves little room for towers to defend the walls nearest an attack that comes almost immediately afterwards. If we only had catapults, this would be a problem, but trebuchets can hit them from the nearby corners of the base, meaning there is no safe haven for this siege. The rocks they launch, and magic alike, snipes off the growing number of enemy catapults, and what's left is focused down by the heroic horse archer, who scurries about their counterattacks and continues working them down. Unfortunately, the walls aren't doing as well despite time bought. The enemies are still strong enough to survive even the heavy rain of shots that try to crush them into the ground. They break through walls, overcome the magic opposing them, and kill dozens before the last of them are made to draw their final breath. It's not an ideal outcome, but while this may just be the tyrannical lord in me, 27 deaths don't seem that bad when 87 people want to move here every day. Gravekeepers tend to the dead, and soldiers take the southern lands. Builders work on both remaking the walls, then improving the formation with another layer to further delay enemies. The city itself looks amazing. The sprawl outward, ringed by solid stone, just hits an aesthetic note that I absolutely love. The days till the penultimate attack are filled with little sorties that only occasionally involve really close calls with the Staff Sergeant Horse Archer, but eventually it's time to prepare. The last attack was 2 helmets worth, but this one is but a single one, which actually makes me more worried in a strange way. Builders work on last-minute defenses in their path, while the attackers seem to send a lone paladin as a messenger that they will never get the chance to bury. And the rest don't take too kindly to the shots. Their mounted soldiers actually force the horse archer inside since he can't outrun them. They avoid being sent to the heavens by their siege weapon shots, and their heavy armor lets them survive the flecks of dirt and shards of rock in their face. Reinforcements lie behind those sent to the ground who will never rise, and this is going to be rough. Miners just barely acquire the iron needed to upgrade the obelisk that controls magic, while the paladins grind through the walls. The beams of magic that we use so well for so long only slowly kill them and aren't going to be nearly enough. Just when all hope seems lost, a very important button becomes ungrayed. The mages in the town hall call upon their mightiest spell to rain destruction down in apocalyptic quantities. It cost a lot of magic, but it is impossible to think that it was not absolutely needed then and there to keep the town safe. The struggling survivors are cleaned up, meaning that there isn't too much damage to even fix in the final 5 days. Stone is sold for the surprisingly hard to maintain wood needed as foundation for stone walls. The last royal camps are cleared out, and the final houses are built to fit an expanded army. The builders then work on adding way more trebuchet stands. But it might be for naught. While clearing the camps out, the worst possible thing happens. That corpse right there is Staff Sergeant Horse Archer. No, he didn't get a promotion in that last siege. And there is only one place that their memory can be properly honored. Not at the... Yeah, let's just make another. Go, we're good. More walls are built all the time to make sure the onslaught of trebuchets have ample time to kill their foes, though they take breaks to move lumberjacks near foresters planting trees to secure the last burst of needed resources. The final rebel camps on the map are cleared during the 41st day, as it becomes apparent that the king's armies will march from almost every direction, and the final trebuchets line up to face them. Hundreds, no, thousands swarm in. The ground shakes. The air smells of cold steel and colder resolve. But soon, everyone here knows that the stench of blood and reeking viscera will taint the land further. Mages harness stockpiled magic to quickly snipe off siege weapons, while trebuchets fill the air with arcing boulders. It barely puts a dent in such numerous foes. More magic is needed, and after a debate on where it's best to put it down, a meteor mars the weak western wall with ash that forms bulky shadows. It doesn't hinder the enemy's advance much, and they're breaking forward on all fronts over the remains of their siege weapons and the corpses of their friends. The trebuchets are doing work, but there are just so many foes that are covered by their remaining siege weapons that trebuchets have to focus down first. Magic continues to help, but there are more to replace those killed, and not very many mana crystals left. The last ones are used to kill hundreds with another devastating meteor and to finish off some of the final siege machines, leaving just their steel versus our rock and stone. The northeastern front is finally won. The northwest and west are dwindling down and will soon be handled by the trebuchets there. The southwestern vanguard is the last one that continues making progress, but without their siege at their back, their attack peters out before they can finish clearing all 5 walls that the robust economy put in front of them. In the end, we kill over 10,000 royal soldiers and a couple close calls that could have ended the run far earlier. It took about 4 hours of gameplay, about 3 of which was for the successful run itself, to beat just one of the game's challenges. And it frankly has me wanting more. The game's got the kind of loop that makes me so eager to go again so that I can play better and try new strategies. I perhaps abused siege weapons, but I want to see if I can handle the second mission that kicked my ass if I don't use them. I do love the way they blow enemies sky high, but ground soldiers also seemed a lot stronger than I gave them credit for, and I have a better grasp on the economy now too. When the first attack arrives, better macro mean that there are 24 archers behind dual walls that slaughter the enemies without even giving them the chance to feel a glimmer of hope. The fortifications then double as a staging ground to clear out the nearby larger camps, while the town halls upgraded to work towards tier 2 troops as quickly as possible. Other tier 2 upgrades that build up the economy and improve magic aren't far behind. Builders only switch to making walls when the next attack nears, but there are enough working that being a little late isn't an issue. Upgraded barracks are already churning out more balanced squads, while our enemy's leader, Scott the Bloody, makes a really bad case for why we should have sided with him over the king. Although the full melee force isn't quite trained up when enemies march in, what's there is able to collapse on the rebels and smash them into the wall. They do a lot of damage, but without their full might, a little magic helps finish the job when it seems like they're close to losing a few inexperienced and as of yet unimproved hands. The soldiers use that extra time granted to push out. Axe warriors do more damage than spearmen, but the latter have longer range that helps them mob enemies. And they also do triple damage to horses, like the paladins that gave me so much trouble before. A large platoon of healers keeps them alive, forming an impressive fighting force that's cheap, does more damage, and can sustain itself unlike the walls. It's better at clearing camps than archers, though I will let live me from when I was recording narrate this clip.
This is kind of working, sort of just oh, no, that's the weakness. That is the weakness. Alright, keep running.
So, there still are some things that need to be addressed. The rocks that provide the base safety also limit space, meaning that farms are hard to justify, though there is room for a bustling market and a lakeside tavern. The troops continue securing needed land from less defended camps, as the horde the rebels were supposed to be. A few more spearmen will round out the ball of melee troops, but the crossbowmen that follow will provide needed covering fire and help kill siege engines, thanks in part to a range improved by further research. The troops only return from their campaign in the wilds to crash against the third siege's flanks and gut them like curs against walls that are hopefully already stain-proofed. The battered enemies do manage to destroy a flimsy wooden gate and kill an archer that unfortunately tumbles into the rubble, but that's the first death in 12 days, which feels damn good. The improved army marches north, now that crossbows can shoot just as far as the catapults that warded them off before. They're extremely effective, so long as I angle them right and everyone fires before they shoot back. But healers can pick them up, and the unchecked soldiers are able to decimate enemy forces there. Plentiful stone is sold in the market to obtain other resources needed to unlock a tier 3 stronghold, and spent preparing walls for the next attack as it's already approaching. But it's not much of a threat either. Crossbowmen atop the tower target siege down, though the ground troops lose a few hands, first to my carelessness at the start, then as the squishier swordsmen are sandwiched by the broad shoulders at their back. The melee lines do a great job of just churning enemies down and stopping them from swarming the walls. In the end, the fourth attack doesn't destroy a single one before the buzzards are given their due feast. The town hall is being upgraded to celebrate. Foresters use that to start planting trees, to ensure the wood line stops disappearing into the horizon, and to upgrade the barracks yet again, as more fortifications are built out in preparation of the next attack already. The last level of barracks has just enough time to make one of each of the tier 3 troops before their first test arrives. These guys are expensive, but oh so powerful. For reference, the tier 2 melee troops have 6 to 10 DPS and about 100 health. Foot Knights are sturdy enough that catapults can't knock them around, have 10 DPS, and 300 health. Hammer guys are almost as tanky, just as sturdy, and while they only show 3 DPS, they do it in an area, which means they're great at tearing through weaker troops much like a catapult would be. And all of this is before they're even upgraded. The attack that arrives is initially handled well, with crossbows killing siege engines, and a huge line of healers keeping allies in the main brawl alive, but a bad rally point and closed gates caused some squishy troops to charge to their deaths. The half dozen there join the hundreds of enemies in staining the grass red, but there's no time to mourn them when the soldiers head back out to finish clearing the map a few days before the final attack arrives. This will be where this strategy starts to struggle. Trebuchets have the range to cover multiple approaches from behind the walls, but with enemies on all sides, the incredibly effective ball of troops must split into questionably effective blobs. In fairness, the town has resources and room for more houses that mean we could have fielded a larger army, able to better handle being split. But honestly, what's here is still a damned impressive force. The veritable ocean of mana with over 100 crystals available is quickly tapped to kill siege machines crossbows aren't near, while the sounds of the cataclysmic melee break out all over the base. Scott the Bloody themselves charge in, but is mauled by troops that churn through his chaff, then slaughter him before he can kill any in turn. A few soldiers die in each of the squads, mostly by being mobbed by enemies while they're so busy running into position that they don't fight back, but they are martyrs that will be remembered by their victorious peers. The day is won with less than 40 dead on my side in total to almost 5,000 of theirs. With the second mission done, the story is expanded with cutscenes that build the world and give context for future missions. In this case, the local rebellion has been put down, but the king needs to send us abroad to buffer his coffers. I would be headed a different way if I'd sided with the rebels and not the king before the mission started though. The third mission against the rebels abandons the idea of holding out for a certain number of waves, and instead has you preparing an army of 100 men to travel overseas on ships you build, while you face an unending number of assaults. It's got new environments, and this one seems to really lack stone, which would definitely change how I approached it. There's tons more map environments available and armies to fight in sandbox mode scenarios, some of which start you off with great bases and others with your problems. There's the undead armies, headed by these massive and terrifying monstrosities that one-shot whole groups of upgraded tier 2 troops I just rolled over my last mission with, and that have 6,000 health. On my end, I feel like there's a ton more to explore even after a dozen hours in this game. From new strategies and in-game mission objectives, to the harder difficulties and challenge runs that could involve things like not pausing or not using magic. Think I should see just how far I can go in this game? Like the video and leave a comment if so, then subscribe so you see any attempts in the future. If you're new to the channel, check out some of my previous videos where I do challenge runs in games like Dwarf Fortress. I have had an absolute blast checking this game out. The link to the Steam page is in the description if you feel like checking it out, and thanks again to Door407 for sponsoring this video.